Number 1. Leek Rainwalker. Leek was last seen at a home belonging to his adoptive father's parents in the 10 block of Hill Street in Greenwich, New York on November 1, 2007. His adoptive father, Stephen Burl Kerr, spent the night alone in the house with him. Leek disappeared during the night and has never been heard from again. Kerr says he woke up the next morning and, at 7:30 a.m., found a note Leek left behind. It read, "Dear everybody, I'm sorry for everything. I won't be a bother anymore. Goodbye, Leek." Kerr reported his son missing at 8:57 a.m. He is not believed to have been carrying any cash or credit cards when he went missing. Leek had been living with his adoptive parents, Kerr and his wife Jocelyn A. McDonald, for 5 years. By 2007, he was born addicted to crack cocaine and spent his early childhood in 6 different foster homes. His parents stated Leek had violent temper tantrums and his 4 siblings were afraid of him. Leek's former foster parents, Jody and Larry Schoen, who cared for him for 4 years, confirmed this, stating his outbursts could last up to an hour. They described Leek as a very intelligent but very troubled child. The Schoens had originally planned to adopt him, but after he attacked their daughter when he was 7, they decided he could no longer stay in their home and he went to live with Kerr and McDonald, who have 3 biological sons and 1 adopted daughter. The children ranged in age from 8 to 14 at the time of Leek's disappearance. Leek's adoptive family led a non-traditional lifestyle at the time of his disappearance. Their home in rural Washington County, New York had no running water, the toilets are outhouses, its only electricity comes from a generator that runs for several hours during the day, and everyone slept in one room. The family stated they lived this way because it was better for the environment. A photo of the Washington County house is posted below this case summary. Leek's family still owns the home, but in 2008 they moved to West Rupert, Vermont. Kerr and McDonald stated Leek was both suicidal and homicidal at the time of his disappearance, but he wasn't taking any psychiatric drugs or receiving any therapy for his mental conditions. On October 23, a little over a week prior to Leek's disappearance, Kerr called a crisis hotline and said his son was unmanageable. Kerr stated Leek had threatened a small child in his homeschool group and McDonald was afraid of him and no longer wanted him at home. Kerr said he and his wife wanted to reverse the adoption. The crisis worker said it was not possible to reverse the adoption and suggested respite care instead. Leek was sent to the home of Elaine and Tom Person, licensed foster parents who had provided respite care for him in the past. They kept him until November 1, then gave him back to Kerr, who planned to send him to another respite home the next day. That was the day Leek was reported missing. An extensive search of the area turned up no indication of Leek's whereabouts. Within a few days police announced they thought he could have met with foul play, since it is unlikely that a child of that age could survive on his own. The possibilities that Leek ran away or committed suicide have not been ruled out. However, McDonald took a polygraph in his case, but Kerr refused to take one. Both parents maintained their innocence in his case and stated they believed their son simply ran away. They suggested he might be living with an African-American family or gang, as Leek had always considered himself African-American rather than biracial and had wanted to live with other African-Americans. The person said the farewell note Leek supposedly left on the night he vanished was not a goodbye note, but rather a letter he was assigned to write by his father for homework. Kerr allegedly told his son to write a note apologizing to the people he had harmed, and Tom saw him writing it, although he didn't actually read it. Elaine and Tom believe this was the note found after Leek vanished. Elaine, several of Leek's former foster parents, and his adoptive maternal grandparents have started a website publicizing Leek's disappearance. Elaine wrote she believed Kerr harmed Leek on the day he went missing and caused his disappearance. In January 2008, police named Kerr as a person of interest in Leek's disappearance. They stated they had video surveillance camera footage of Kerr driving his van around Greenwich after midnight on the night of Leek's disappearance. At the time Kerr says he was asleep. Cellular phone records also indicate Kerr took a different route to the house than he had said. Investigators appealed for information on Kerr's whereabouts on November 1 and November 2. In February 2008, police conducted a search warrant on Kerr's father's home, where Leek was staying when he disappeared. They seized a computer to try to determine if the machine was used to write the alleged goodbye letter. but couldn't prove or disprove the theory. Days after the search, Kerr and MacDonald filed a lawsuit against the police department, alleging they'd been illegally detained and the search was improper. Leek's adoptive maternal grandmother, Barbara Reilly, has been active in the search for him and filed for custody of him after his disappearance, but was denied. In July 2008, she was charged with burglarizing Kerr and MacDonald's home. Reilly has pleaded not guilty. Shortly after the burglary, police went to the home and removed a piece of clothing for testing. They stated Reilly had seen the clothing while she was inside. In a media interview, Reilly said it was the yellow fleece shirt Leek was said to have been wearing when he disappeared. Photographs of Reilly, Kerr and MacDonald are posted below this case summary. In a media interview, Reilly stated Kerr had anger management issues and had been going to counseling for them, and that MacDonald had made him move out of the family home for brief periods twice in 2007 because of his aggressive behavior towards the children. Reilly said she witnessed one incident where Kerr became angry with Leek, dragged him outside and repeatedly dunked him in a nearby creek. She said MacDonald made Kerr write a letter of apology to Leek for this and made him do the child's chores for a month. Leek may be in the New York cities of Albany or Altamont. Authorities stated they have little evidence as to his fate and no one has been charged in connection with his case, but foul play is suspected in his disappearance. Number 2. Maura Murray. Murray was involved in a one-car accident Route 112 in the Woodsville section of Haverhill in northern New Hampshire between 7 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. on February 9, 2004. Her car, a black 1996 Saturn with Massachusetts license plates, failed to negotiate a sharp curve and ran off the road, striking a tree. Haverhill is 5 miles away from Wells River, Vermont and 1 mile away from Swiftwater Village by the Connecticut River. This was the second car Murray had wrecked in 3 days. She had previously damaged her father's vehicle in another accident. A resident near the site of the February 9 crash called the police, even though Murray had asked him not to. She had vanished by the time authorities arrived at the scene about 10 minutes later. Her car was left behind, severely damaged in the front end and not in a drivable condition. The doors were locked and a few personal belongings, including Murray's cellular phone and credit and bank cards, were missing, but most of her possessions had been left inside. Murray has never been seen again. There were no footprints in the snow around the car and no indications of a struggle, and tracker dogs lost her scent within 100 yards. Police believe she got a ride from the scene of the accident to parts unknown. The witness to the accident says she did not appear to be injured, but she may have been intoxicated. Murray resided in Hanson, Massachusetts and was a student at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst at the time she disappeared. The university police are assisting with her case. She was a nursing major and a Dean's List student, and was employed by a local art gallery in addition to having a job on campus. She planned to take a nursing job in Oklahoma after graduation. 4 days before she disappeared, she left her job early at her supervisor's suggestion. She appeared to be extremely upset about something and was unable to work. It has not been discovered what was bothering her, but Murray's sister spoke to her on the phone that same evening and said their conversation was normal. Murray emailed her professors the day of her disappearance and said there was a death in her family and she had go away, but would be in touch upon her return in about a week. No one had actually died. After her disappearance, Murray's dormitory room was found packed up, as if she was planning on moving out altogether. She withdrew $280 from her bank account the day she disappeared, but there has been no activity on her bank accounts or credit cards since then. She packed up all her belongings in her dormitory room into boxes, and left behind a personal note for her fiancé, an Army lieutenant named William Roush who was stationed in Fort Still, Oklahoma. Murray also emailed Roush on the afternoon of her disappearance. In the email she asked to speak with him. The day after she was last seen, Murray called Roush, but he only heard her breathing on the line. The call could not be traced. Investigators inspected Murray's computer after she vanished. They discovered she had been searching on the internet for information on hotels in the Burlington, Vermont area. Based on this information, they checked Burlington hotels for any signs of Murray, but turned up no clues as to her whereabouts. Murray and her father went hiking together in the Burlington area in the fall of 2003, but she has no other connections to the city. She used to camp regularly in New Hampshire and knew the state well, but there are no known reasons why she would go to Haverhill. Extensive searches of the woods around Haverhill have turned up no evidence as to her whereabouts. There is speculation that Murray's case may be related to the disappearance of Brianna Mayland, a girl who vanished from Montgomery, Vermont on March 19, 2004. She is still missing. Montgomery is only about 90 miles from Haverhill. Both of them are attractive brunette young women, and both disappeared after car accidents in which their cars were left behind with personal items inside. The FBI met with local authorities to discuss possible links between the cases. However, they concluded that, despite the apparent similarities, the two females' cases were probably not connected to each other. The theory is not being entirely ruled out, but investigators believe it is an unlikely one. Murray was a student for 2 years at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where she met Roush, before she transferred to the University of Massachusetts. She had majored in chemical engineering at West Point. She is described as a quiet, introverted and extremely athletic person. She may have been carrying a backpack at the time of her disappearance. Her case remains unsolved. Murray's family says it is uncharacteristic of her not to contact them and they fear she is being held against her will. She had not been having problems with her family or her boyfriend at the time she disappeared, and she has no history of mental illness. Police do not suspect foul play was involved in her disappearance. Both Massachusetts and New Hampshire authorities are investigating. Number 3. Jennifer Kesse. Kesse was last contacted via cellular phone at approximately 10 p.m. on January 24, 2006. She was at her residence at Mosaic Apartments in the vicinity of the 3700 block of Conroy Road in Orlando, Florida at the time. She has never been heard from again. It is believed Kesse got up and left for work at approximately 8 a.m. the next morning, but she never arrived there. She was employed as a financial analyst at a timeshare in Ecoe, Florida at the time of her disappearance. Her co-workers notified her family after she did not show up for work, and her parents let themselves into her apartment. Nothing appeared to be out of place there, but Kesse was missing, as were her purse, her cellular phone and her black 4-door 2004 Chevrolet Malibu with a Florida license plate number H90 Kike. Photographs of the car are posted below this case summary. 3 days after Kesse's disappearance, her car was found in the parking lot of the Huntington on the Green apartment complex at Americana and Texas, less than a mile from her residence. Residents at the complex stated the car had been parked in the lot for several days. Bloodhounds tracked Kesse's scent from her vehicle back to her own residence. There was no signs that a struggle had taken place in or around the car, and its valuable DVD player had not been stolen. Authorities announced they were looking for a person of interest in Kesse's disappearance after reviewing surveillance tapes in the area where her car was found. An unidentified person, approximately 5'3" to 5'5" tall, was seen parking Kesse's car, getting out and walking away. Investigators have been unable to tell whether the individual is male or female. This individual is the prime suspect in Kesse's disappearance. A photograph of the person is posted below this case summary. He or she was wearing clothes similar to what a painter or manual worker would wear. Prior to her disappearance, Kesse had expressed concern that her apartment complex was unsafe. She had been living on her own for only a few months prior to her disappearance and there were few other residents in the complex, which was under construction. Kesse stated she was frightened of some of the construction workers. It has not been proven that any of them were involved in her disappearance. However, Kesse had a good relationship with her boyfriend and vacationed with him in the Virgin Islands the month she went missing. He is not considered to be a suspect in her case, as he has an alibi. It is extremely uncharacteristic of Kesse to miss work, be out of touch with her family, or leave her cellular phone turned off. It has been turned off since her disappearance. There has also not been any activity on her credit cards or e-pass. Kesse is a 2003 graduate of the University of Central Florida. Her degree is in finance. She was a member of the Alpha Delta Pi sorority while she was a student. Her case remains unsolved. Number 4. Dorothy Jane Scott. On May 27, 1980, 32-year-old Secretary Dorothy Jane Scott dropped her young son, Shanti, off at her parents' house in Anaheim, California and went to a company meeting. While there, a co-worker named Conrad Bostron complained of pain so severe that Dorothy offered to take him to the hospital with another co-worker named Pam Head. The doctors found that he had been bitten by a black widow spider. At around 11 p.m. that same night, he started to recover and was discharged. Pam stayed with him while he filled out paperwork for insurance, while Dorothy went to fetch her car and bring it close to the entrance so he wouldn't have to exert effort and walk far. After a few minutes, Pam looked out the window and noticed Dorothy's car exit the hospital parking lot. Pam and Conrad waited 2 hours for her to return, but when she did not, they notified hospital security and her parents. Authorities searched for her but turned up empty-handed in the subsequent days and weeks following her disappearance. The first major lead police received was when it was reported that Dorothy had received numerous phone calls at work in the weeks before she vanished. She told a co-worker that the unidentified caller watched her every move. She mentioned that he described specific details of her life to her which led her to believe the calls were real and not prank ones. The horror of her disappearance didn't end the day she vanished. Almost every Wednesday for 4 years, the phone rang at her house with the voice of the same unidentified man who'd harassed her. The calls usually came when her mother was home alone. He would either ask for her or state he'd killed her and she'd been held captive. In August 1984, Dorothy's skeletal remains were found along Santa Ana Canyon Road in Anaheim Hills, and her car was found burned in an alley in Santa Ana. Her disappearance and death, as well as the identity of the unidentified caller, remains a mystery. Authorities believe that the unidentified caller was responsible for Dorothy's disappearance and death. He has never been identified. It has been speculated that this case could also be connected to the disappearance of Patricia Jean Schneider, whose car was also found burned. This case's original air date is unknown. There are conflicting reports on whether or not this story was actually on Unsolved Mysteries, the murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. Essentially, she was being stalked by somebody who claimed to be in love with her and would not leave her alone. The calls were innocent at first but became more demanding and angry as time went on. Dorothy, of course, quite understandably became more stressed out and in fear of her life. She had even taken up a self-defense class at a local community center. The last anybody ever heard from her was over 30 years ago. A co-worker had been bitten by a poisonous spider, and she and another co-worker, also a woman, drove him to a nearby Arizona hospital to receive proper medical treatment. After everything was all clear, she went into the parking lot to grab her car and drive to the main entrance to pick up her friends, except she pulled barreling out of the parking lot extremely fast, going the wrong way, almost hitting her co-worker who was trying to make sense of what was going on. She had been on the way to pick up her son, and they found the car she drove on fire in a ditch off an exit on the interstate somewhere in the desert. She was never seen again. Her mother still receives calls from who the police presume is the suspect. The calls discontinued several years ago, prompting theories perhaps the killer is dead or has disappeared. Number 5. Bobby Dunbar. The mystery of Bobby Dunbar is one that is almost more terrifying than a murder mystery. It is the story of a child lost and another likely taken from his mother and guardian to replace a lost boy. In that way, it is the story of two boys lost, one seemingly gone forever and one taken and raised as another child. The story begins on August 23, 1912, when Percy and Leslie Dunbar took their sons Bobby and Alonzo on a trip to Swayze Lake in Louisiana. The family was from Opelousas, Louisiana. That day, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared. The disappearance of Bobby Dunbar made headlines and searches were conducted for 8 months before police found a boy they believed was little Bobby Dunbar. They found the child in Mississippi with William Candwell Walters. Police arrested Walters and took the child. Despite Walters' claims that the boy was not Bobby Dunbar, he said the boy was in fact Charles Bruce Anderson and that the boy, known as Bruce, was in his custody with the boy's mother Julia Anderson's permission. Not long after obtaining the child, police sent for Bobby Dunbar's parents. Julia Anderson also made her way to Mississippi to plead her case. Depending on which reports from the time are to be believed, the Dunbars and their younger son Alonzo recognized Bobby immediately or took him in overnight and confirmed he was their son after giving the boy a bath. Julia was also given a chance to identify the boy. She had not seen the child in 13 months, though she said she only gave him to Walters for a 2-day trip. She defended Walters, though either side of the story was sounding like kidnapping. Julia Anderson did eventually identify the child as her son Bruce. However, A judge found that the child was Bobby Dunbar and gave custody to Percy and Leslie. Julia Anderson had 3 children out of wedlock, which looked bad in that day and age. Her story was also that she allowed William Cantwell Walters to take her child for 2 days and then had done nothing when the boy was gone for 13 months. That could not have looked good, either. There was also some suspicion that Walters was Bruce's uncle, meaning that Julia, a servant in the Walters household, had become pregnant by her boss. After the trial, she maintained that the child was her. Bruce and the Anderson family considered the boy kidnapped by the Dunbars. William Cantwell Walters was found guilty of kidnapping and spent 2 years in jail before being released rather than being given another trial. The boy, who may have been Bobby Dunbar, was raised as Bobby Dunbar and grew to be a man and have children of his own as a Dunbar. Some stories say that he visited the Andersons and even brought his own children to see them. He passed away in 1966. In 2004, curiosity got the better of the Dunbars. Bobby's son, Robert Dunbar Jr., consented to a DNA test, as did his cousin, the child of Alonzo Dunbar. The results were shocking to the family. The 2 men were not related. They should have been first cousins, had Percy and Leslie been honest about his identity. It appears they were not. Now, the question is, what happened to the real Bobby Dunbar on August 23, 1912? Had his parents did something neglectful or horrible and latched on to Bruce Anderson to cover up their mistake? Had the boy drowned? Had he been kidnapped by someone other than William Cantwell Walters? There is no way of knowing. Number 6. Dennis Martin. On June 14, 1969, Dennis Martin, his father, grandfather, older brother and family friend with another set of 2 young boys decided to go camping for the Father's Day weekend in the Great Smoky Mountains. Dennis was 6 years old, just days away from his 7th birthday. On the day of his disappearance, Dennis was wearing a red t-shirt tucked into his green hiking shorts. He had curly brown hair. At 4:30 p.m., the group of boys were playing in a grassy area of Spence Field along the Tennessee and North Carolina state line. The boys were going to sneak up and scare their family. The 3 older boys went one way and Dennis went the other way. The plan was for them to jump out of the woods on both sides and scare the adults. The older boys jumped out and everyone laughed and had a lot of fun. Then they asked where was Dennis. When it came time for Dennis to show up and scare the family, he never showed up. Official reports say that it had only been 3 to 5 minutes since Dennis was last seen. However, Bill Martin, the father, immediately began searching. Dennis was wearing a bright red shirt, which should have stood out in the forest. They hollered for him, but couldn't find him. For anyone, it is very easy to get turned around in the thick rhododendron and rugged terrain up there, but especially a little boy. Another problem at Spence Field is there seems to be an incessant wind that comes out of Tennessee and whips over the mountain. You could blow and whistle up there and the wind drowns it out. Bill hiked the path in several directions looking for Dennis. The grandfather hiked to Cades Cove and back. When no sign of Dennis was found, park rangers were called. It began to rain, and by morning the rain was estimated at 2.5 inches. The storm was so vicious, the people there at the shelter had trouble even lighting a fire. You have lightning and thunder and all of this rain. You can imagine the people there in the shelter just imagining what the little boy was going through. That's all you could possibly be thinking. Where was he? Where could he be? The following days, crews started searching the trails and swollen creeks for any sign of Dennis Martin. Special forces were in the area performing exercises and were made available to assist the search. The search party now included Green Berets with experience fighting and navigating in the jungles of Vietnam. While the initial search lacked clear organization associated with modern searches, the issue was complicated by rain that kept coming in large amounts. Several more inches of rain washed clues away and made roads too muddy to travel by vehicle. Helicopters began transporting search crews from Cades Cove to the mountain top, but foggy and cloudy conditions frequently kept the aircraft grounded. The manpower on the ground grew to a gargantuan amount of volunteers ready to scour the Smokies for Dennis Martin. It went from hundreds of people to where you eventually had 1,400 people saturating the search area. If you've got 1,400 people, they've stomped on everything. It just doesn't work. Every broken branch or piece of white an experienced tracker looks for has been trampled. You've got search dogs that cannot sniff out any clues because there were 1,400 people there. We did searches back then like they were forest fires. You surrounded it and drowned it. The afternoon that Dennis disappeared, Harold Key, 45, of Carthage, Tennessee, was near Rowan's Creek, a short distance away from the Martin family's campground. Mr. Harold Key and his family had been walking the trail in the area looking for wildlife, in particular any sign of black bears nearby, when they heard an enormous, sickening scream. Within moments, Key's son pointed out a bear nearby, located up the ridge from them. Mr. Key, upon observing the bear his son had spotted, determined this to be not a bear, but a dark-figured, rough-looking man attempting to remain concealed behind a thicket. The man, which Key didn't manage to view in clear detail, had purportedly been carrying something over his shoulder. Harold Key, unaware of Dennis Martin's disappearance earlier that afternoon, supposed that the figure might have been a moonshiner who had tried to hide from them. Upon learning days later of the search for Dennis Martin, Harold Key notified the FBI about what he and his family had seen the same afternoon Dennis went missing. The FBI ruled this out as being connected, as it was 9 miles from Spence Field. Number 7. Brian Waldron. Brian Waldron was 19 years old when she went missing from the small town of Revelstoke, British Columbia, Canada. She was last seen between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. on September 5, 1998, Labor Day weekend, CP Rail Slow-Pitch Tourney weekend, at the 7-Eleven store in Revelstoke, BC. 5 days later, her abandoned vehicle, black Acura Integra, gold-colored rims, was found 30 kilometers south of Revelstoke up Echo Lake Road, in the general direction of the Acolcolex Falls and River, near the dam. Her wallet, driver's license and $200 cash were found in the vehicle. Brian was seen in the company of 3 young unidentified females at the 7-Eleven store who have never come forward about her disappearance and were never identified. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt and black sandals. Her disappearance has been a pretty big mystery to everyone in this small town, especially the circumstances surrounding it. Who were the 3 women she was seen with? Why have they never come forward? The fact that her wallet, with cash inside, was found in her car is the most puzzling aspect to me. No body was ever found. Monday marks the 13th anniversary of the suspicious disappearance of a Revelstoke teen. On September 5, 1998, Brian Waldron, 19, seemed to vanish without a trace. Waldron was last seen around 11:30 a.m. at a 7-Eleven store in Revelstoke getting into her car with 3 unknown girls. She was driving a black 1989 Acura Integra with distinctive gold rims and a BC license plate of GMN 661. Waldron had made plans to meet a friend and go to a long weekend party, but she never made it. A man out hunting early the next morning says he saw a girl matching Waldron's description walking along the Echo Lake Road about 30 kilometers south of Revelstoke. That was the last possible sighting of the teen. Her vehicle was found 5 days later on the logging road south of Revelstoke. There were no signs of foul play and $200 in her wallet were still in the car. An intensive search of the forested area failed to find any trace of the missing girl.